I watched my sister calmly present my father's will to the lawyer. "Dad wanted me to have the house and business," she announced, not making eye contact. "Alex gets the furniture." I said nothing, just nodded politely. 3 weeks later, when I returned with the safe deposit, box key, her face turned white. The real will changes everything. My name is Alex Donovan, 36 years old, middle school science teacher from Portland, Oregon. My father, Richard Donovan, passed away last month after a sudden heart attack. A self-made man who built a successful construction company from nothing, raised 2 kids alone after our mother died of cancer when I was 12. Dad started Donovan Construction with a single truck and a toolbox, taking whatever jobs he could find. I remember him coming home exhausted, hands calloused and cracked, but he'd still find energy to help with homework or throw a baseball in the backyard. By the time I was in high school, he had 30 employees and was bidding on multi-million-dollar projects. "Honest work, done right," was his company motto, painted on every truck and hard hat. When Mom got sick, everything changed. Claire was 17, already planning her escape to college. I was 12, confused and scared. For 8 months, our lives revolved around hospital visits and whispered conversations. Dad tried to shield us, but some nights I'd find him at the kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms, his shoulders shaking silently. After Mom died, Claire left for Northwestern 3 months later. She called occasionally, visited on major holidays, but her life was in Chicago now. Meanwhile, Dad and I formed a different kind of partnership. He taught me to change oil, fix leaky faucets, calculate lumber for a deck. Not because he expected me to join the business, but because these were the ways he knew how to connect. For 24 years, it was just Dad, my older sister Claire, and me against the world. Or so I thought. The day we buried him was unnaturally bright, sunlight gleaming off the casket as it descended into the ground. Claire stood beside me in designer black, her husband Marcus hovering nearby, checking his watch. They'd flown in from Chicago the night before. "Such a tragedy," she whispered, dabbing at dry eyes. Dad was too young. I nodded, unable to speak. At 58, he had seemed invincible to me, still working 12-hour days, still calling every Sunday to check in, still planning the fishing trip we'd take once things slow down. Now he was gone, and I felt adrift. "We need to discuss the estate," Claire said as we drove from the cemetery. "I've already spoken with Dad's attorney." Something in her tone made me glance over. Claire was staring straight ahead, her profile sharp against the window, fingers tapping rapidly on her purse. "Already?" I asked. He's not even in the ground yet." "Don't be naive, Alex. There's the business to consider. It can't just sit there." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It won't. Ted's been running operations for years. Dad trusted him." Claire made a dismissive sound. "Ted is an employee, not family." I didn't answer. Ted Michaels had been Dad's right-hand man for 15 years, practically raised me after Mom died while Dad rebuilt the business. He was more family than Claire had been since she left for college, and never really came back. The meeting with Richard Winston, Dad's attorney, was scheduled for the following morning. Claire insisted we meet at the house Dad's house, rather than the law office. "More personal," she explained with a tight smile. Winston arrived precisely at 10, gray-haired and solemn in an expensive suit. Claire had prepared coffee, arranged herself at the head of the dining table where Dad used to sit. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Winston began, setting his briefcase on the table. "Your father was a good man." I nodded, throat tight. Claire murmured something appropriate. "I understand you have the will, Claire?" Winston asked, looking slightly confused. My head snapped up. This was the first I'd heard of it. "Yes," Claire replied smoothly. "Dad gave it to me for safekeeping last year. Said he didn't trust safe deposit boxes." Winston frowned. "That's unusual. He never mentioned this to me." "He was a private man," Claire said, sliding a document across the table. "Here it is." I watched Winston examine the papers, my stomach knotting. Dad had never mentioned giving Claire his will. In fact, he'd specifically told me about his safe deposit box at First National. Said all his important papers were there. "This appears to be in order," Winston said finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Dated 14 months ago. Properly witnessed." He cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Richard James Donovan, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath the following. To my daughter, Claire Donovan Reynolds, I leave my primary residence at 1442 Cedar Street, my business Donovan Construction, including all assets and accounts, and 60% of my remaining financial holdings." My breath caught. This couldn't be right. "To my son, Alexander Donovan, I leave all furniture and personal belongings in the Cedar Street residence, my collection of sporting equipment, and 40% of my remaining financial holdings." The room swam before me. Dad's business was worth millions. The house at least $900,000 in Portland's market. The furniture and personal belongings might total $50,000 if I was generous. "There must be some mistake," I said quietly. "The will is quite clear," Claire replied, not meeting my eyes. Winston looked uncomfortable. "I must say this differs significantly from discussions I had with your father. People change their minds," Claire said sharply. "Obviously, Dad trusted me with the business. Alex has his teaching career. My teaching career that paid $58,000 a year, barely enough for my apartment and student loans. Claire," I started, "Dad always said he was leaving the business to both of us. He talked about us running it together." She waved a dismissive hand. "Wishful thinking. He knew I was the only one with actual business experience. Claire had an MBA and worked in corporate marketing. She'd never driven a nail or managed a construction crew in her life." "Mr. Winston," I said, turning to the attorney, "did my father discuss his will with you recently?" Winston hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Client confidentiality prevents me from discussing the specifics, but I will say that your father consulted me about estate matters approximately 3 months ago." Claire's smile tightened. "Well, obviously he changed nothing, since this will is dated over a year ago. Something wasn't right. Dad would never have cut me out like this, not without a word. And he certainly wouldn't have given Claire, who'd visited maybe twice a year, control of the business he'd built from nothing, the business he'd been gradually teaching me about despite my career choice. But I said nothing. Not then, because the look in Claire's eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't grief or business necessity. This was calculation. "I see," I said finally, "if that's what Dad wanted." Relief flashed across Claire's face. "It is. I'm sorry, Alex, but it makes sense if you think about it. You never showed much interest in the business." That wasn't true, but I let it slide. I had bigger concerns now. "When will the transfer of assets occur?" I asked. "Winston?" "There's a standard probate process," he explained. "Typically 6 months to a year, though with a clear will it might be expedited." Claire nodded briskly. "I've already spoken to Ted about transitional leadership. Marcus and I will be relocating within the month, so that was the plan. Claire and her investment banker husband would sweep in, take over everything Dad built, and probably sell it off piece by piece." "I'd like a copy of the will," I said to Winston. "Of course," he replied, giving me a searching look. After Winston left, Claire busied herself making calls, speaking loudly about taking over the family business and significant assets. I wandered through the house, apparently soon to be her house, touching Dad's things, remembering. In his study, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Construction plans spread across the desk, family photos on the walls, the small model of our first family home he'd kept as a paperweight. I opened his desk drawer, finding the usual supplies pens, paper clips, notepads, and a small silver key I recognized immediately, the safe deposit box. I slipped it into my pocket without hesitation. Claire was in the kitchen. still on the phone, talking about property values. "I'm going to head out," I called to her. "Got papers to grade." She covered the phone. "We need to discuss when you'll clear out Dad's personal things." "I'll handle it," I said. "No rush, right?" Her expression suggested there absolutely was a rush, but she just nodded and returned to her call. That night I couldn't sleep. The will made no sense. Dad had always been meticulously fair, dividing even small things equally between Claire and me, as kids. He'd once driven back 40 miles to a restaurant because they'd given me a slightly smaller piece of pie than Claire. "It's the principle," he'd explained, while Claire rolled her eyes. And I tried not to laugh. And he'd loved his business like a third child. He wouldn't have handed it over to someone who had shown zero interest until now. Claire had made her disdain for construction work clear since she was a teenager. "I'm not getting my hands dirty," she'd say, while I happily helped Dad organize tools or deliver donuts to job sites on Saturday mornings. I remembered Dad's pride when I surprised him by showing up at his office after graduating college, asking for a summer job before my teaching position started. "You don't have to do this," he'd said. "I want to understand what you've built," I'd replied. He'd given me the toughest foreman as a supervisor and the dirtiest jobs on site. At dinner each night, he'd ask detailed questions about what I'd learned, nodding with quiet satisfaction at my answers. By summer's end, I understood profit margins, material logistics, and crew dynamics. Though I chose teaching as my career, Dad made sure I understood the family business. When Claire visited that Christmas, she'd been appalled at my dirty fingernails. "You have a master's degree," she'd reminded me. "Why are you digging ditches?" Dad had intervened before I could respond. Your brother's learning value, Claire. Something a paycheck doesn't always teach." The memory made my current situation even more confusing. Dad had invested years teaching me about the business, even while respecting my choice to teach. Why would he suddenly cut me out completely? The next morning, I called Ted Michaels. "Alex," he answered, voice rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry, son. Your dad was the best man I ever knew." "Thanks, Ted," I said, throat tight. "Listen, did Dad ever mention his will to you? What he was planning to do with the business?" Ted was silent for a moment. "He did. Said he was setting it up for you and Claire to share, with you having controlling interests since you've actually spent time learning the ropes. Said Claire would get more of the liquid assets since she wasn't interested in construction." My heart pounded. That's not what the will says. Claire produced a will giving her the business and the house. I get the furniture. "That's bullshit," Ted said flatly. "Your dad would never do that. He was grooming you, Alex. All those weekends you spent with him at job sites. The accounting sessions, that was preparation." I rubbed my temples. "Claire says he gave her the will last year. It's properly signed and witnessed." "Who witnessed it?" I checked the copy Winston had provided. "Thomas Reed and Susan Miller." Ted was silent for a moment. "I don't know any Susan Miller. Thomas Reed is a foreman who left the company about 10 months ago. Had some gambling problems, if I recall." A chill ran through me. "Ted, I found the key to Dad's safe deposit box. He told me all his important papers were there. Then I'd check it right away," Ted said grimly. "And Alex, be careful. Your sister always did like nice things more than nice actions." I took a personal day from school and drove to First National Bank downtown. The process of accessing the safe deposit box was straightforward but nerve-wracking. What if Claire had already been here? What if the box was empty? The bank manager led me to a private room after verifying my ID and the key. She returned moments later with a rectangular metal box. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Donovan," she said, closing the door behind her. I sat staring at the box for several minutes before working up the courage to open it. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key. What if I was wrong? What if Claire was telling the truth and Dad had actually decided she deserved everything? What if this box contained evidence that would only confirm my disinheritance? The lock clicked, and I lifted the lid. Inside were exactly what Dad had described. His important papers. Birth certificate's mine, Claire's. Dad's own faded document from 1965. Mom's death certificate, still painful to see after all these years. The deed to the house. Insurance policies neatly organized in labeled folders. A small velvet pouch contained Mom's wedding ring and her mother's brooch family heirlooms. I'd assumed were lost years ago. Dad must have kept them safe here, waiting for the right moment to pass them on. Beneath a folder of tax documents, I found what I was looking for. A will, dated just 2 months ago, in a sealed envelope marked Last Will and Testament of Richard James Donovan, in Dad's precise handwriting. My heart pounded as I held it, knowing that whatever was inside would either confirm my suspicions or destroy them. My hands shook as I opened it. The document inside was professionally prepared, notarized, with Winston's law firm letterhead. I, Richard James Donovan, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. The will laid out a completely different distribution than the one Claire had presented. The business was to be shared, with 70% ownership to me, 30% to Claire. The house was to be sold, proceeds split equally. Financial assets divided 60-40 in Claire's favor. There was also a letter addressed to both of us. Dear Claire and Alex, if you're reading this, I'm gone sooner than I planned. I'm proud of both my children, though you took such different paths. Claire, your ambition and business sense have always impressed me, but your attachment to material success concerns me. I'm leaving you a larger portion of my liquid assets because I know financial security matters deeply to you. Alex, your decision to teach showed me you valued making a difference over making money. I've left you controlling interest in the company because over the years, you've shown genuine interest in how it works and what it means to the community we serve. The choice to continue with it is yours. You could sell your shares to Claire if you prefer. Whatever you decide, remember that how we treat others, especially family, matters more than what we own. With love, Dad. I read the will twice, then the letter 3 times. Emotions washed over me in waves. Vindication, anger, grief, and finally, resolve. Claire had forged a will to steal not just from me, but from Dad's final wishes. The question now was how to proceed. I made copies of everything, returned the originals to the box, and spent the afternoon planning my next move. I needed to be strategic. Claire wouldn't surrender easily, and direct confrontation might lead her to destroy evidence or create new problems. For the next 3 days, I played along with Claire's plans. I helped inventory Dad's furniture that I'd supposedly inherited. I nodded as she discussed taking over supplier meetings with Ted, who gave me subtle, knowing looks, but said nothing. I even helped her measure for new curtains in what she now called my house. Meanwhile, I quietly gathered information. I visited the witnesses from Claire's will. Thomas Reed, the former foreman, lived in a small apartment across town. When I mentioned the will, he looked nervous. Look, man, I needed money. Claire said it was just a formality, that your dad wanted it this way, but hadn't updated the paperwork. She paid you to sign as a witness to a will my father never saw. He looked at his shoes. 5,000 cash. I was underwater with some guys you don't say no to. Susan Miller turned out to be Marcus's cousin, visiting from Chicago when the will was supposedly signed. I consulted with my own attorney, Marissa Chen, who reviewed both wills in her downtown office. The contrast between the documents was stark. When laid side by side, Claire's version looked authentic at first glance, but contained subtle inconsistencies that became obvious once you knew what to look for. This is serious, Marissa said, setting both documents down and removing her glasses. Forging a will is a felony in Oregon, Class C, punishable by up to 5 years in prison and $125,000 in fines. Add fraud charges related to the business and property values, and your sister could face significant prison time. I stared out the window at the Portland skyline, conflicted. I don't want her in jail, I admitted. She's still my sister. Dad wouldn't want that regardless of what she did. I just want what's right. What Dad wanted. Marissa studied me, her expression softening slightly. Family complications are always the hardest. Sometimes justice and reconciliation seem mutually exclusive. Is there a middle path? She tapped her pen thoughtfully against the desk. We have options. We could contest the fraudulent will in probate court, present the real one, and let the judge decide. With the witness testimony you've gathered and the evidence of payments, it's a strong case. The court would likely invalidate Claire's will and validate your father's actual will. What's the downside? It's public, messy, expensive, and family relationships rarely survive intact. As if mine with Claire could get worse. What else? I asked. We could approach your sister privately, present the evidence, offer a settlement that respects your father's wishes without public exposure. I considered this. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Claire to face consequences for what she'd done. But another part remembered Dad's letter, how we treat family matters. Let's try the private approach first, I decided. 3 weeks after the initial reading of the will, I asked Claire to meet me at Dad's house. She arrived looking harried, but triumphant, already dressed like a CEO in an expensive suit. Make it quick, Alex. I have a meeting with the bank about the business accounts. You might want to reschedule, I said calmly, setting a folder on the dining table. We need to discuss Dad's actual will. Her eyebrows rose. We've been through this. You got the furniture? It's not my fault Dad didn't value your contribution more. Claire, I said, opening the folder. This is a copy of Dad's real will, dated 2 months ago. I found it in his safe deposit box exactly where he told me all his important papers would be. She froze. Composure, slipping for just a moment before recovering. That's ridiculous. Dad gave me his will personally. No, he didn't. I laid out the evidence methodically. The statements from Thomas Reed and Susan Miller. The bank records showing she'd paid Reed $5,000 in cash the day before the fraudulent will was dated. The notary who confirmed she'd never notarized any will for Richard Donovan, despite her stamp and signature appearing on Claire's document. Claire's face went from flushed to pale as I continued. When I placed Dad's letter on top of the pile, her hands began to shake. You've committed multiple felonies, I said quietly. Will forgery, fraud, attempted theft of assets worth millions. My attorney says you could face up to 7 years in prison. You wouldn't, she whispered, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I don't want that, I admitted. Despite everything, you're my sister. Dad's daughter. He wouldn't want his legacy to be a court case that sends you to prison. Hope flashed across her face. So what do you want? Exactly what Dad wanted. The genuine will entered into probate. The business shared as he specified. The house sold and proceeds divided equally. Claire stared at the documents, defeat finally registering. And if I refuse? Then the evidence goes to the district attorney and the probate court simultaneously. Your call. She was silent for a long moment, calculating options that no longer existed. Fine, she finally said. But I want my 30% share of the business bought out. I don't want to be partners with you. That's your right under the will, I agreed. We'll have it professionally valued. Something like shame finally crossed her face. How did we get here, Alex? We used to build blanket forts together. The simple childhood memory hit me harder than I expected. We grew up, wanted different things. I thought Dad loved me less, she said quietly. He always seemed to understand you better, spend more time with you. When Mom died, he leaned on you, not me. He leaned on a 12-year-old because you left for college and rarely came back, I pointed out, but without heat. He was proud of you, Claire. Read his letter again. She picked it up with trembling hands, eyes scanning the words. A tear finally fell, leaving a track through her perfect makeup. "I would have paid you fairly for your share," she said defensively. "Eventually. But you would have taken what wasn't yours to decide. Dad built that company to serve people, create jobs. It wasn't just an asset to liquidate." Claire wiped her cheek. "Marcus said it was underperforming. Could be stripped and sold for parts at a substantial profit." Of course he did. Marcus, who wore Rolex watches and talked about wealth management like it was a religious calling. "That's not what's going to happen," I said firmly. "We're doing this Dad's way." The legal process took 6 months. Claire fought me on smaller points, contesting property valuations, arguing over Dad's classic car collection, demanding certain personal items, but never again contested the genuine will. Winston looked visibly relieved when I produced the safe deposit box will, admitting he'd had serious concerns about the one Claire presented. "Your father was meticulous about his affairs," he told me privately. "The sudden appearance of a will I hadn't drafted raised red flags, but without evidence to the contrary, my hands were tied. Thank you for finding the truth." During those months of legal wrangling, I spent more time at Donovan Construction. The first few weeks were awkward. Employees weren't sure who was actually in charge, and rumors about the family dispute had spread. Ted called an all-hands meeting my third week. "Some of you have questions about leadership," he began, addressing 30 confused employees in the warehouse. "Let me clear things up. Richard Donovan built this company on trust, quality, and treating people right. His son Alex is here to continue that legacy. Anyone who has a problem with that can come see me directly." No one did. Ted helped me understand the business operations more thoroughly while we waited for probate. I shadowed project managers, studied financials until midnight, and visited clients to introduce myself. Each night I'd return to Dad's house, still technically in probate limbo, and sit in his study, surrounded by the business he'd built, trying to decide what my future should be. My school principal called after I'd missed 2 weeks of classes. "Alex, we need to know if you're coming back. The substitute is struggling with your 8th graders." I stared at the construction schedules spread across Dad's desk. "I need more time," I said, surprising myself. "Can I extend my leave?" To everyone's surprise, including my own, I took a full leave of absence from teaching to work at Donovan Construction. The decision wasn't planned. It evolved organically as I became more involved with the company's operations and saw the impact it had on employees' lives and the local community. "Your dad would be proud," Ted told me one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections in the office long after everyone else had gone home. "You've got his eye for both the work and the people doing it. That's rare. Most folks get one or the other." "I'm still figuring it out," I admitted. "That's what your dad said for 30 years, Ted laughed. "Never stopped learning. Never thought he had all the answers." The house sold quickly in Portland's hot market for well above asking price. Claire took her share and returned to Chicago with Marcus, who seemed decidedly less interested in her after the family business opportunity evaporated. I heard through mutual friends that they'd bought a luxury condo downtown smaller than they'd planned, but still impressive enough for their social circle. I used part of my share as a down payment on a smaller house closer to the business. The rest I invested back into the company, expanding our apprenticeship program for at-risk youth. Something Dad had always wanted to do, but never found the time to fully implement. The program started small, just 5 high school students from underserved communities, learning basic construction skills after school. Within a year, we had 20 students, a dedicated training facility, and partnerships with 3 local high schools. We named it the Richard Donovan Skills Academy. "What made you think of this?" Ted asked one day, as we watched a 17-year-old successfully install her first electrical outlet under a journeyman's supervision. "Dad used to say construction taught more than building," I explained. "It taught planning, problem solving, and the satisfaction of creating something lasting. Not everyone needs college, but everyone needs purpose." He said that exact thing to me when I was 20 and didn't know what to do with my life. Ted revealed. That's why I stayed all these years. The business thrived under our shared leadership. Ted's experience balanced my new ideas. We expanded into sustainable building practices, something Portland clients increasingly demanded. Dad's reputation for quality and honesty gave us an advantage over competitors who cut corners. By the end of my first year, we'd hired 15 new employees and increased revenue by 22%. Meanwhile, life changed in unexpected ways. I officially resigned from teaching, though I still volunteered at my former school's science club. I met Sarah, an environmental engineer who consulted on one of our green building projects. We started dating 6 months later. Claire and I speak occasionally now. Strained conversations about nothing important, weather, distant relatives, neutral topics that avoid mentioning Dad or what happened. She never apologized directly, but 6 months after returning to Chicago, she sent me a package. Inside was the model of our first family home Dad had kept on his desk. This belongs with someone who understands its value, the note read. There was also a check her first profit distribution from her 30% ownership that she'd decided not to sell after all. On the memo line, she'd written, "Dad was right about you." I placed it on my own desk at Donovan Construction, now in an office next to the one I'd kept exactly as Dad left it. Some days I sit in his chair, looking at the photos on his wall, Mom, Claire, and me as kids, his crews and job sites over the years. "I'm trying to do it right, Dad," I tell him sometimes, "the way you would have wanted." I like to think he hears me. Claire came to visit last Christmas, alone. Marcus was tied up with clients, though rumors from mutual acquaintances suggested their marriage was struggling. We had dinner at my house, awkward but civil. Sarah made her famous lasagna and tried valiantly to bridge the conversational gaps between siblings who now lived in completely different worlds. After dinner, Claire asked about the business, her interest seeming genuine for the first time. I showed her our portfolio, on my laptop new projects, sustainability initiatives, community partnerships. She seemed particularly surprised when I drove her to see the Richard Donovan Skills Academy, our youth center, now housed in a formerly abandoned warehouse we'd renovated. "This is impressive," she said, genuinely moved as we watched teenagers learning various construction skills from patient veteran builders. One girl was carefully measuring and cutting trim pieces under Ted's supervision, her face a mask of concentration. "You've really expanded Dad's vision." "Not expanded," I corrected gently. "Just continued it. This is who he was building things that matter, investing in people." Claire watched a young man proudly show off the perfect joint he'd just created in a cabinet door. "Dad would have loved this," she admitted, her voice catching slightly. "Yes," I agreed. "He would." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of tools and instructors' encouragement filling the space between us. "I never understood it," Claire said finally. "The satisfaction he got from all this. Building things seemed so basic. I wanted something more sophisticated." "And now?" I asked. She gave a small, sad smile. "And now I manage marketing campaigns for luxury products nobody actually needs, while you're changing lives." Maybe I'm the one who didn't understand sophistication. As she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. Sarah had tactfully retreated to give us privacy. "I shouldn't have done it, Alex. It was wrong." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Not quite an apology, but close. "Why did you?" I finally asked the question that had burned in me for over a year. "We were family. Dad loved you." She looked away, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Marcus had lost a lot of money on bad investments. More than I told you. We were underwater on everything, the Chicago house, credit cards, investment loans. His firm was investigating him for ethical violations. We were looking at bankruptcy, possibly worse. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. When Dad died, I saw it as a solution. The business would have solved everything. We could sell it, pay off the debts, start fresh. You were going to dismantle everything Dad built just to bail out Marcus? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. I told myself it was just business, that you had your teaching career, your simple life, that you didn't need millions. Her eyes finally met mine. I lied to myself as much as to you. You could have just asked for help, I said more gently. Dad would have helped. I would have helped. Her laugh was bitter. Ask my little brother for financial help? After I'd spent 20 years building the image of corporate success? My pride wouldn't allow it. Pride, I echoed. Dad always said it was the most expensive thing most people own. She nodded, eyes wet. Turns out, he was right. She hesitated. Marcus and I are separating. His problems were worse than I knew. There were other women, other debts. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. You know what's ironic? Claire wiped at her eyes. If I'd been honest about our situation, Dad's actual will would have given me more than enough to solve our financial problems without destroying the business. My dishonesty got me less than the truth would have. We still haven't fully healed. Maybe we never will. Completely. The breach of trust was too profound, the betrayal too calculated. But something shifted that Christmas night. A door cracked open that had been firmly shut. 6 months later, Claire moved back to Portland. She rented a small apartment downtown, found work with a local marketing firm, and began attending our monthly company meetings as a minority shareholder. Her insights on branding and market positioning were actually valuable. Dad would have appreciated the irony. Last month, she volunteered to teach a business communications workshop at the youth center. I watched from the doorway as she patiently helped a 17-year-old boy craft his first professional email. Something in her expression reminded me of Dad. The same focused attention. The same belief that small details matter. Dad's letter stays framed on my office wall now, not hidden in a drawer. A reminder that how we treat family matters more than what we own. Below it sits the model of our first family home, a symbol of where we started and how far we've come. Some days I think about the alternate path if I hadn't found that key, if Claire had succeeded. The business dismantled for quick profit. Dad's legacy erased. Our relationship poisoned by a secret I'd never even know about. Dozens of employees would have lost their jobs. The youth center would never have existed. Claire might still be trapped in a dishonest marriage, living a life built on appearances rather than substance. That single silver key changed everything. Or maybe it was Dad, still looking out for both his children, making sure the truth had a way to find the light. Perhaps he knew Claire well enough to anticipate her temptation. Perhaps he trusted me enough to know I'd find my way to the truth without his direct intervention. Ted suggested something similar last week as we celebrated breaking ground on our largest project yet. Your dad was always 3 steps ahead, he said, raising his glass in a toast. He knew exactly what he was doing when he told you about that safe deposit box. He was giving you both a chance at redemption. Either way, I'm grateful. For the business, yes. But more for the chance to honor what Dad built, not just a construction company, but a family that, despite everything, might someday build something together again. Sarah and I are getting married next spring. Claire is helping with the planning, throwing herself into details with surprising enthusiasm. Last week, she brought over a box of old family photos she'd found in storage. "Oh, look at this one," she said, showing me a faded picture of Dad holding each of us by the hand at a construction site, all 3 wearing 2 large hard hats. His 2 apprentices. I looked at our young faces, smiling in the sunlight, Dad standing proud between us. "He built us too," I said, quietly. Claire nodded. "And now we're trying to rebuild ourselves. It won't be perfect. Some cracks will always show, But Dad taught us both that anything worth building takes time, patience, and the right foundation. The safe deposit box key now hangs on my keychain. Not because I need it anymore, but as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones we can spend, but the truths that set us free.